countdown. So good evening, Danvers. Welcome to the October 30th, 2023 virtual meeting. Janet, could you please do a roll call?
Yes. Robin Doherty,
Yes.
Alice Campbell,
Yes.
Eric Crane,
Here.
Josh Kepnes,
Yes.
Gabe Lopes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this meeting is being broadcasted on DCAT. Is there anyone else in the audience who is recording it? Okay, so Danvers Public Schools is a dynamic community of independent learners dedicated to respect, responsibility, creativity, and the pursuit of academic and personal excellence. So we will now begin. So are there any items of interest to the superintendent or the school committee tonight?
Madam Chair, I would just like to compliment Dan and Mary and their team for the presentation last week. Actually, it might have been 2 weeks ago now at the Inclusion Committee meeting. Julie Pasternak was there and just did a terrific job presenting the elementary curriculum. And I think the feedback that came from the Inclusion Committee was very positive. So thank you for that, Dan and Mary, and pass along our thanks to everybody who participated. The only other piece, Madam Chair, and this is just a point of order, that because we're virtual, all votes have to take place by roll call.
Yes, I remembered that.
There you go.
Mr. Crane, I even have that written down.
I like that. I'm sorry to presume that you didn't, Madam Chair.
Well, sometimes I don't, so I appreciate it. Any other items of interest from the school committee? Okay, so information from the superintendent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My list is very small. I do not have the accompanying PowerPoint presentation. I just want to give a quick update. The visits to schools, which is really part of my entry plan, has been a wonderful experience. I've been able to spend a full day so far at Riverside, at HRMS, and the Smith School with plans to go to Great Oak. And I'll keep working that in. Usually Thursdays work out best, but I arrive at the start of school and I stay throughout the end of the day through dismissal. It's just great to see our teachers in action and our staff, our support staff. I'm able to sit in the classes and just be like a fly on the wall and observe great instruction. I do some walkthroughs, each one of those visits with the building principal, and Mary's joining us as well. She joined us last time at Riverside, and it was wonderful to see the MTSS block at work. Just knowing how much planning and preparation went into that, and actually see the differentiation taking place for what students need, and seeing how it's broken down and using everybody that's available. In fact, they really were excited for us to see the MTSS block. So I think that's important to point out, because not only is that just a great collaboration between all of our educators in the buildings, but it's also an important piece that we're working on to improve student achievement and growth. So hats off to all curriculum directors and principals and Eric Oxford and all that have put this together at the elementary level. And it's been great to see the students in action. They're very proud of their work, and it's unbelievable the competition with ST Math. It's just incredible how the kids are so engaged, and they're just really working hard. So I just want to report out that the visits have been outstanding, and I really have learned a lot, and open up additional time at the end of the day for the staff if they want to come down voluntarily to debrief and provide feedback. So it's been very helpful for me to really get a gauge what's happening in the schools. And I still do the typical walkthroughs here and there throughout the week, but it's been an outstanding experience, and looking forward to continued visits. The other update too is just on the horizon. We'll do a presentation. The commissioner met with all the superintendents about 2 weeks ago and discussed the chronic absenteeism issue that's hitting everybody very hard across the state. And the numbers are very, very high with chronic absenteeism. All districts have really been impacted by this. There have been some great improvements within our schools, but the numbers are still up overall. So we'll do a presentation sometime in November and also will work with Principal Federico in terms of retention rates and our discussion on that we said we'd bring back as well to a later time. But in terms of now, that's all that I really have because I know we have a lot of time for our MCAS presentation. So thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Bauer, I know the staff enjoy seeing you, but the kids do too. And they're starting to learn your name. So that's a good thing.
Well, they were helpful in the Smith School when we were walking the trail to make sure I could step over the log and I didn't fall down.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. But they're all recognizing your name everywhere. So that's good. So we have a couple unfinished business items for second reads. So Mr. Bauer, if you want to start that one.
Yes, the wellness policy update. So it was brought to my attention, and I have to credit Alice with a lot of collaboration here too. We've discussed the wellness policy because the update for this year was the piece about food-related fundraisers. So I presented a while back. There were some inconsistencies with my presentation and actually what was written into the policy. The inconsistency was initially it was, at the end of the school day versus not competing with the school lunch program. So I did work back with the Wellness Advisory Committee. We met on the 19th and worked with them to discuss the policy and what was the intent of the policy. And really the competition with lunch should not happen. And also really during the academic time. So that wording is really important. I've tweaked it and I added it, dropped it into the folder with the change of the wellness policy. It's all the same except for the specific food-related fundraisers. Everything has to come from the Smart Snacks Nutrition Standards. That's federal regulations. That's the A-list. Everybody's good with that. But the key wording is after the academic time of the school day. So what that allows is for at the end of the day, if a school wishes to have a recognition and make a connection with food fundraiser, they're able to do that. And Principal Riley modeled that at the Thorpe School, but others have followed suit. So the Wellness Committee, they were fine with this piece because they saw the spirit is not to compete with the lunch program and give specific delineation what that means. So, I want to bring this back for second reading and just please note that the wording has changed with this version, just from at the end of the school day to after the academic time of the school day for food-related fundraisers. Everything else remained the same. So I do recommend this, if possible, for a second read with that amendment to the food-related fundraising part.
So we need a motion for a second reading.
So motion for a second reading of the health and wellness policy.
Second.
This would actually be for adoption of the policy.
Yes.
Yep.
Is there any discussion?
No, I'll just echo everything that Dan had said. I think we've done a nice job incorporating feedback from both the wellness committee as well as the PACs across the district. So we did receive feedback from all the stakeholders to find wording that everyone was happy with.
So, Madam Chair, just a quick question for Mr. Superintendent. So so if I'm reading this correctly, the revised wellness policy says if something, and I'm just saying this in a different way, if it meets the Smart Snack Nutrition, then you can do something at lunch for a food related. Oh no, or no.
We're doing this outside of the academic. So we don't want to compete with the school lunch program. Initially it said at the end of the school day, which wouldn't allow it during the school day.
Gotcha.
But we want all the academic time finished because where I contradicted is I stated the intent was really not to compete with the school lunch program.
Gotcha.
Because we found students that weren't eating their lunch and all that piece. So now at the very end of the day, if principals work it out when things are done, then they can certainly have that, at the end of the day to do a celebration.
Okay. I wasn't trying to muddy the waters. I was getting tripped up it was on me, not the way it's read. That's
Gotcha.
good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So it doesn't have to be after school ends, but it could be like, we got to 90% in ST math. We're going to have a celebration from 2 to 2:25 or something like that, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And What about if there's fundraisers that were already approved? Like once we approve this, are those fundraisers still approved or do they have to be changed? Like the food ones?
The way I understand it, if I can, through the chair, the way I understand it is that, it's just the shifting of when they will occur. That's all. Right. And the adjustment though has to go to the A-list food. And everybody's aware of that piece. That's not just that's the federal guidelines for that. So we've shared that all with the PACs, the A-list, so they all know and they're ordering. You can order even Hershey's ice cream, believe it or not, but it has certain nutritional guidelines that it hits, which would be above what you might buy just, off the shelf at the store.
Any other discussion?
I know we haven't really talked about it either, but there is always going to be allergy aware options as well for any of these too. So I want to make sure that was noted too.
Yes.
And no one will be denied if they can't.
And no one will be denied. Yep.
Okay. So there's no other discussion. Janet can do a roll call to approve the health and wellness policy.
Robin Doherty,
Yes.
Alice Campbell,
Yes.
Eric Crane,
Yes.
Josh Kepnes,
Yes.
Gabe Lopes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Bauer, you got a lot today.
Let's wrap this up. The second piece is the recommendation to request the name of the DHS library for Colleen Ritzer for second reading. And I'm very honored to make that recommendation.
So you need a motion. Okay. Second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion?
Just that it seems a perfect way to remember Colleen and make sure that she has a special place in the memory of everybody here in the high school and will for decades to come. So it's a perfect way to do this.
I agree. And I want to thank the teachers too for really doing this in the grassroots way and coming up with their own thoughts about this. So I really appreciate that too. Anyone else? Okay, so we're going to vote to name the DHS library the Colleen Ritzer Library. So Janet, could you do a roll call, please?
Yes. Robin Doherty,
Yes.
Alice Campbell,
Yes.
Eric Crane,
Yes.
Josh Kepnes,
Yes.
Gabe Lopes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Bauer, the last one.
Thank you very much. The last one is the recommendation for the approval of the building rental policy for a second reading. And Principal Federico is attending if there are the further questions. And again, before we go, I just want to thank him for his efforts and the collaboration on this.
Okay, so we need a motion.
So moved.
Yep. Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion?
So just for clarification, Adam, this is in its final form, ready to go and be implemented sometime after the first of the year, or?
So the policy is in its final form. Now it would be up to the school district to, put the infrastructure in place to manage it. But yeah, the main policy is set.
Did we decide on who's managing it yet? Oh, that's Adam.
No,
Oh, okay. We don't know, but
that has not been
nothing
decided.
Nothing will happen until that person is in place.
I think there'll probably be some collaboration in the initial phases where we start to look at some of the facilities, and then we'll see how it goes.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussions? All right. Well, I know we've talked about it at length the last couple meetings, so we need to vote now to approve the building rental policy. So, Ms. Ingraham.
Robin Doherty,
Yes.
Alice Campbell,
Yes.
Eric Crane,
Yes.
Josh Kepnes,
Yes.
Gabe Lopes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bauer, I think the monthly budget report in Camp Cody stipends is coming from Ms. Crum.
Yes, and Miss Crum is available and she is on the call. So when she's ready, please take it away, Miss Crum.
On mute.
You're on mute.
Famous line of the year back in 2020. You're on mute.
Hi,
Yep.
thank you very much. Apologize for that. So the September budget report is presented. It accurately reflects the spending through the month of September. You'll notice just a couple of lines that have already needed to be adjusted, specifically the contract for the athletic trainer services that we contract out for. The rest of the lines are a little bit still work in progress in terms of just making adjustments to reflect the hiring and shifting of personnel between positions and schools that has continued through the beginning of the school year. But everything else looks like it's going to be in line. The other big adjustment will be for the busing contract that we discussed in the spring. It came in a lot higher than we had planned for. We had planned for, just to refresh everybody's memory, at like a 9% increase in the contract, and it was up about 16%. So that line will also be adjusted, and we'll realize some savings with the way we're charging some of the things that are already in the budget. Does anyone have any questions about the September budget report?
Nope, looks clear.
The other item on that is my piece on the agenda is approval of the stipends that we pay. The 6th grade overnight trip up to Camp Cody or Nature's Classroom occurred earlier in October, and the teacher chaperones and the coordinator are paid their stipends basically to support that trip out of the funds that are collected as fees from the students who participate. And so the student activities policy and procedures require school committee approval before any stipends are paid using student activities funds. So the list of those stipends has been provided for your approval before they're processed through payroll.
Okay, so it doesn't really cost the district additional money. It's all based on the
That is
cost of the trip.
There's a budget for the trip that includes the cost, the invoice from Nature's Classroom for the facility and those costs, the transportation back and forth in buses, and then these personnel costs that are the chaperones that stay with the students overnight.
So is there a motion to approve the Camp Cody stipends?
Motion to approve the Camp Cody stipends.
Second.
Janet?
Robin Doherty,
Yes.
Alice Campbell, Eric Crane,
Yes.
Josh Kepnes,
Yes.
Gabe Lopes.
Yes.
Thank you, Pam. I think if that's all you have, you're welcome to stay. It's up to you. But you're
Thank you
welcome
very
to
much.
leave.
I appreciate the option. Have a good evening.
Thank you, too. All right. So the next new business, Mr. Bauer.
Okay, back up again. So this is a recommendation for the Great Rock Church to operate as a private school. To provide context, I did send the school committee the information that was provided to us, the application, which I believe is 341 pages, as well as the faculty handbook and student handbook. Just to give further context, this was actually in discussion back in 2021 under Superintendent Dana and Assistant Superintendent Tavernas. They also met with Mary last year. So when I came aboard in July, the folder was passed over to me, and we went through the review. And thanks to Mary's help, just to guide me through, did a lot of research on this because I wasn't sure exactly, just out of transparency, the responsibility of our school district to approve a private school. So we reached out to a lot of sources. We reached out to our school attorney. We reached out to Desi. We reached out to other superintendents. I reached out to my coach. And everything came back that it's within our purview. In fact, we have a school committee policy, which is LBC, Relations with Non-Public Schools. And I put that in the memo that I sent as well, that basically recognizes, and we will approve a private school when it's satisfied with the instructional program of the school equals that of the town public schools in thoroughness, efficiency, and progress made. Also, the recommendation by DESE, which goes back to 2007, which basically states that essentially if the school that is wishing to become a private school, the entity becoming a private school, they have to have specific items such as an attendance policy meet other standards. And when I did the research, really kind of parallels homeschooling in terms of the areas to look for approval. There's not a lot of specifics in our purview in terms of making this approval, but we dug down deep and we went through everything from, is there an attendance policy? And you can see that they clearly have an attendance policy because that is mandated by the state. There's a compulsory attendance policy. But also program of studies, student performance procedures. In fact, private schools are not subject to length of school day and year, but they have a calendar for 180 days and hours for elementary and secondary. There's not a certification requirement for teachers at the private school level. They're looking for a bachelor's degree. The Corey check, and as well, we worked out the fingerprinting too that they have to go by. That's a mandate. They do have textbooks and materials. I also have to say, Mary and I visited back, I think it's September 1st, we visited the facility, did a tour through. So we did see all these items. We saw the inspection certificates. They did provide all that too. They do have a policy and procedure for maintenance of school records. And again, the compliance with applicable laws, the attendance policy is the big one. Then they have all the safety items in place. We did speak with our inspector and the fire department, so they have the necessary items there. So, taking all that into account, after reviewing the materials provided, as well as the statutes and advisories and other materials we reviewed, we recommend that the school committee approves the application of the Great Rock Christian Academy to operate as a private school in Danvers, Massachusetts. One thing I also did put into, before I turn this over to you, Madam Chair, I did provide a while ago the breakdown. Currently, they're operating as like a homeschooling area, and they do have students there from 31 different cities and towns. So there's a breakdown that they provided. The facility is located like right on the edge of Middleton and Danvers. And then they had a breakdown by students of grade level too, which had primarily a lot of students at the elementary and middle school. So again, at this time, I've made the recommendation to the school committee for the first reading of the application for the Great Rock Christian Academy.
So is there a motion?
Motion to, what is it, discuss or approve?
The proposal for first reading.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep. So motion to have a discussion over the proposal for first reading of the Great Rock Christian Academy.
Do we have a second?
Sure, second.
Okay, thank you. Is there any discussion?
Could I ask a quick question? I know we have a couple of our homeschool students currently going through Great Rock, correct? So what would that do for us? Like, would that affect our budget? Would does that affect us if these students will now be shifted from homeschool to potentially a student enrolled in this academy?
Well, they're not. I was on mute. So the homeschool students are not enrolled. So it's a parallel.
Okay, it is. All right. I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
The only thing that it could change is next year, because they're in Danvers, when we do the federal grants for like special education, Title I, Title II, and Title IV,
It could affect that.
they are going to be entitled to some of our money.
Okay.
Not a small, depending on how many kids are enrolled in their school that are from Danvers.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And that's why, Alice, I did provide, because if I figured that question may come up, there are 122 that are currently there under the homeschooling co-op. And out of that 122, the 20 represent Danvers. So there's a scattering of over 31 communities.
Madam Chair, if I could, are there any any impact on transportation requirements where these are elementary students? I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, we provide some transportation for St. Mary's, don't we? Or do we?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, I thought at one point we did, maybe we don't. Yeah, my understanding is that if they meet the statutory requirements, then we really are in a position where we have, much like homeschool proposals, we have to say yes.
And I do want to say that Andrea Alexis, who I've been working with, and Mary and I have been working with, they've been forthcoming with information. Every time we've asked for information, they've been forthcoming, and there were a few items that they reviewed and revised, and they've been timely with their response to us and very cooperative.
Just one question, Madam Chair, for the group. What's the plan for, is this a K through 12 school that's planned?
Yes, that's their plan. Yes, K through 12.
And this is more of a formality, right? Like we're not going to, this wouldn't fall under our jurisdiction as a school committee or anything. Just the fact that it's part of Danvers because they are a private school, right?
Right. So exactly, and that's why our school committee policy states that, it's basically if the bare essentials are met, and that's why the advisement from DESE, it goes back to 2007, has not been amended, but it's basically, and a lot of those are recommendations. So the information I provided, that's just the base level of items that you would have in a school, and they meet those items.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so if there's no other discussion, we can vote this as a first reading. So Janet?
Gabe Lopes,
Yes.
Josh Kepnes,
Yes.
Eric Crane,
Yes.
Alice Campbell,
Yes.
Robin Doherty.
Yeah. So then we can put as a second reading, I guess, the November meeting.
Yes.
For final approval. Okay, thank you. So the review of the MASC resolutions, Mr. Crane, I'm gonna defer to you about this because unfortunately I recently have a personal conflict that I cannot go to the conference anymore. So in that case, if no one, well, I know it's last minute, it's November 8th, 9th, and 10th, but Eric, if none of us can go, we just don't vote, right?
Right.
Okay. Should we still review though?
We can if anyone's interested, but normally we put that review on for the purpose of directing a member, if someone is going, to, as to how we'd like them to vote. If no one is going, then it's up to us. It won't be, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not that the review doesn't have a point, but it's not going to direct anyone's voting.
Apologize for the last minute, and I can share with you personally. I'm not going to publicly say it, but yes.
Okay.
So I know it's last minute. It's the 8th, 9th, and 10th. I know we didn't get to have a rep last year because people's schedules, and I totally get it. So, I mean, it's okay if we don't send someone. So, but we should, I guess, make sure personally. Well, we'll be able to. We will learn after the conference what was approved, also as far as resolutions.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. With
I'm sorry.
yeah.
Are Dan and Mary going, or is that who
Dan.
is going from the district?
I get to go.
I know. It's only one, I think only one day is the voting. I think it's only on the
Yes.
10th they vote on the Friday.
Yep.
Is that what happened last year?
Madam Chair, you are frozen. Robin, can you hear us?
Robin, you might need to log out and log back in.
Yeah.
The other thing is the Chromebooks are tough on the Zoom meetings.
Alice, you want to go?
Sure. I like it, right?
Hey, you get the power.
All right, moving on. Curriculum, instruction priorities, and assessment data. So, Mary, I'm assuming that is you.
Yes. Oh, Jan says she's logging back.
Okay.
Robin's logging back in. Yes, Alice, you and Robin attended our earlier curriculum and equity subcommittee meeting. And in that meeting, we discussed the demographics of the Danvers Public Schools, looked at the disaggregate data. So we got the demographics gave us a background of like how big those subgroups are. And then we looked at the disaggregate data in the for each of our subgroups. And so as we went through each of that data, we ended up kind of looking at the data factually, and then we ended up making interpretations. And what we really found was that in general, I mean, while our subgroups are performing lower than our all students group, that the students with disabilities subgroup was really, really a need of focus for our actions this school year. So and I think you all know that as we've gone to the town budget meetings, we have been presenting about the resources that we need. I think we've been lacking the resources needed in special education, and but as well as we need to do some work on the models that we have existing. So some of the next steps that we thought that we are suggesting or taking for special education in that area is to first conduct an analysis of our secondary co-teaching model to evaluate the effectiveness. There's many different ways. I think, Robin, as an educator, there's many different ways of models of co-teaching, and we're making sure that we're not relying predominantly on one, which would be there's a teacher and then there's an assistant. And instead, we really want to go at the co-teaching where they both are teachers in the classroom and really working towards making sure every student in that classroom succeeds. Another recommendation that we actually has been in process is to review our student study teams, which is the team that looks at student performance as they go. Have they been recommended for potentially becoming a student with on an IEP? So those processes really needed to be refined and strengthened, and those procedures are taking place. We've had just a big shift in the last week. We're rolling out the new SST process at the elementary level, and Julie Pasternak and Eric Crane have been partnered in this work and did that rollout last week. At the high school level, that has been taking place when Jen Callison, the special ed coordinator, came on last year. She worked to really strengthen that SST process at the high school, so it's more smooth and streamlined, and people are very aware of the steps needed to take. And then at the middle school, they are now working on one, although they are without a special education coordinator. Principal Colin Tony and Ellen Ferrick are working with the support staff, the social workers, the school psychologists, and Lynn O'Neill to refine that process. Right now, it's heavy on the more social emotional side than the academic side, and we're working on that. And in all of these processes we're making a stronger connection to the interventions and making sure that many interventions have been taking place, and to see if they can take hold before the students get referred for special education. The third item we talked about was strengthening Tier 1 instruction, which is definitely in the last 2 years we have been focused on. And then we need to meet the needs of all included students. And the tagline we always use is that you can't intervention your way out of weak Tier 1 teaching. So on the next slide, we'll talk about what we're doing to strengthen that Tier 1. And then the last bullet is to implement the district's special education programming proposal that we worked with the town at the budget meeting earlier in the month. And more specifically, what we really need as far as improving in the MCAS world is to add 2 special education teachers at the Holton Richmond Middle School. So that puts 1 special education teacher on every single team instead of just 2 special education teachers for 3 teams at each grade level. And then bringing in BCBAs to develop behavior plans so the students struggling with staying regulated in the classroom are able to be successful in the general education classroom and able to access the general curriculum. So those are two really important positions that would really help us in increasing the student achievement on MCAS scores for special students with disabilities. And then, key actions, again, we need to improve the whole district and the MCAS, and what are some of the key actions that we are taking. And the first one is raising expectations for all students. That is something personally for 2 years that I've been really working with the teachers on, is really trying to say that, yeah, it's not only that you believe and you have students belong social emotionally in school, but that you show them in your expectations of them in the classroom, that you show them that you believe that they can learn. And that's a really important for a student with a disability. It's very important for our English language learners and our low income students, that we really want to make sure they understand that they can achieve great things. And because they're part of a subgroup, it doesn't mean that they can't achieve what everyone else in our district can achieve. So that's the focus on culturally responsive teaching practices. That happens in our SEI endorsement work that we do, our SEI strategy class for English language learners. It happens with the addressing accessibility for students with disabilities. So that's the work that really needs to get done. We also have coaching for math instruction, especially, with the new math program, Carnegie Math, and Ellen and Peter both will go into more detail about what that looks like. I already went over the second bullet. The third bullet is to work collaboratively with our new special education coordinators. We have one at every level. We have Eric Crane Eric Crane, that's you on the panel. Eric Oxford working very closely with Julie Pasternak. We're missing a special education coordinator at the middle school level, but working to hire one for Ellen Ferrick. And then Peter DeMaro and Jen Callison working very strongly together to make sure that the students with disabilities needs are getting met in the general education classroom. In the last month, we've been engaging staff in disaggregated data, and so that they really see who those students are that are struggling and are not up at the average where all our students are at. And that happened at one of our meetings at the Danvers High School, and the teachers really dug in when they saw the kids weren't meeting expectations. They dug in. They said, "Who are these 17 kids that are not meeting expectations?" And really knowing who those kids are and looking at what interventions need to be put in place so that those students can be successful. And then the last bullet is that we really are working hard to examine our Tier 1 instructional practice and making it so that it's holding high expectations for all our learners. All our newest curriculum programs that we bought have those have practices built into them. We need to make sure that we are holding ourselves to full implementation of the programs and implementing them with fidelity. So that's the elementary reading program, the 95% phonics, and the 2 knowledge-based curriculums that we are piloting. It's the Carnegie Math program for the middle school and high school math, and working in the other discipline areas to really make sure that we're implementing explicit vocabulary instruction and disciplinary literacy strategies so that they're able to access the content through reading. So those are some of the actions that we're taking. You're going to hear more when we get to the middle school and high school presentations, more details. You already heard a lot at our last meeting where Julie Pasternak did a great job of presenting the work at the elementary level. So that was our subcommittee meeting.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Question, Mary, is on the slide that you put up, the first 2 bullets, the culturally responsive teaching.
Yeah.
And forgive me, what was the
coaching for math instruction?
Yes. Well, not the math, the next one down, I'm sorry.
Okay. Sorry, want me to put it back up?
Sure.
I'm sorry. I was getting ready for the next one.
That's okay. I apologize.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay. Creating a sense of belonging for students. How do you know that's happening? How do you measure that? Is that just by observation?
Well, the social emotional is through the vocal surveys and some of the cultural surveys that we've done with students. But the sense of belonging academically does come out in the MCAS and then in our benchmark data that we use in the school district. across the levels. So Julie's like the reading benchmark data that we use through the screeners, the iReading data that they're collecting at the middle school level, and then common assessments at the high school level.
So the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. If the scores go up, you assume that it's working.
Yes. It's also looking, we need to start looking disaggregated data at our local level, at our benchmark data and at our common assessments.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair, quick question for Mary also, if that's right. The one that you mentioned additional headcount, it sounded like you were talking about proposing to bring in more headcount. Is that for 2023 or is that something that we're looking for the following year?
For the 2 special education teachers,
Yep.
yeah, for next year, for FY25, yeah.
Next year. Okay.
It's needed.
Okay. Sorry about the glitch before. I appreciate Alice taking over. So I think then we can go to the MCAS presentation. Are we starting with Holton
Sure.
Richmond first? Okay.
Yep. So I'm moving to that. Sorry. Thanks for your patience while I switch over. So we're going to start with the Holton Richmond Middle School and go through their data review. But before I turn it over to Ellen, I want to give you some historical perspective on the middle school students taking the MCAS. So the 8th graders that took the MCAS last year, it was their first science test ever. They missed in 2019, 2020 taking the 5th grade test. So it was their first time taking a science test for them. But in the ELA and math, it was their second full year of testing, taking 2 sections of the test in 7th grade and then again in 8th grade. So the 7th graders, it was their first full testing year for ELA and math. And then for 6 and 7. So they had pretty normal testing years in the other grade levels, and it was just in science was their first test. As far as trending with the state in English language arts, you're going to see that Holton Richmond is now made a jump from being either at the state average or below it, but to being at or above it now. So that was a great trend we saw. The English teachers, and Ellen's going to go more into it, really did some explicit reading strategies with the students, and I see that work has paid off for them. And it really is. They've made some good gains, and I don't want to go into too deep. I'm holding myself back from giving you details because Ellen is going to be doing that in a minute. And then in math, we are following the state kind of trends, but unfortunately below the state average. And so we're closing the gap in like 6th and 7th grade where it's not so far off the average, where in grade A, we struggled this past year and is pretty below the state. So Ellen, again, is going to move forward and give you more details on about why they feel that's happened. And then finally in science, we've been above the state average in science, although this year we dipped a little bit from our performance in 2022 and, making that gap a little tighter. And we're hoping to get back up, going back to where that gap had been a little bit larger in the next school year. So Ellen's going to give you the rest of the details for Holton Richmond.
Good evening. Hi. So just to give some context and sort of frame, you've seen these before, but we just wanted to remind you, first of all, what we are focusing on as a school in our school improvement plan. So our safe and supportive schools goal is again, parallel to what it was last year, parallel to the district's goal for every student to feel safe, seen, valued, heard, that sense of belonging that Eric was just asking about. But in terms of how we're measuring it this year, our measures of success look different. So the pair survey that we administered last year for the first time, we decided to really focus on 4 areas that were particular weaknesses last year, or I should say we didn't have the gains we wanted last year, and we thought were really kind of the highest leverage points for our work with students. So we're focusing specifically on school bonding, trust, peer relationships, and adult relationships, and looking at the change that students note on that pair survey, and then also looking at attendance and improving our school attendance over last year. Obviously, if the kids aren't in school, then they're not going to be learning, and that's certainly a measure of their sense of belonging as well, whether or not they want to come to school. As far as curriculum, most kind of academic goal this year, we because we wrote these goals over the summer using the data that we had available, we focused on the spring iReady. That was the first time administering the iReady test, so it was really new to us, but it was we really like having a data set that is something to compare to the MCAS. So we just have another data point for looking at students, but also we can get those results immediately rather than waiting the several months it takes to get the MCAS data. So our goal there is that 10% or more students will move into the mid or above grade level or the early on grade level categories on the iReady from the fall assessment. So what that looks like, I'll talk about iReady later on in the presentation. So this fall, we had 236 students in those score bands of being either early on or mid or above grade level. So 10% gain would be essentially 24 students are moving up to 260 students in that grade band. So again, we didn't have the fall scores when we wrote the goal. And then finally, our diversity, equity, and inclusion goal is looking at those culturally responsive practices through walkthroughs in at least 80% of teacher classes. So what that would look like would be basically Adam and I developing some sort of data collection tool for our walkthroughs of classrooms, and then using that to actually identify, what percentage of teachers' classes we're seeing those practices at work in. So that's where we're headed. And this is where we are, at least where we were last spring. So here you're looking at the data for last year's sixth grade class. The first set of data is the previous year's sixth grade. So it's not comparing the same cohort from year to year, but rather you're looking at 2 years ago, sixth grade class to last spring's sixth grade class. So you'll see that gain that Mary referred to in English language arts. We went from being pretty consistent with the state, or actually at the state level in terms of the percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations, to a gain of being 11 points over the state there. So really great gains there. And then, still in mathematics below the state average, statistically kind of really no difference whatsoever. So we went from being 37% meeting or exceeding, where the state was at 42, and then we stayed at 37 and the state was at 41%. So not much of a change there. And then at the bottom, you see the average scaled score on the two tests. You see that for us, our average scaled score at the middle school was 498, whereas the state was 493. And then in mathematics, again, statistically not at that big a difference. 492 versus 494 is basically a couple of questions. So on a different day, our students could have performed at a level even with or above the state for sixth grade. This is last year's seventh grade class, our current eighth graders. And you can see, again, the seventh graders in 2022, where they fell in terms of percentage of students meeting or exceeding versus last year's seventh graders. Again, really nice gains in English language arts from being 3 percentage points below the state for meeting and exceeding to then being 10 points above in ELA. In mathematics, while we're still below the state average or the state percentage of students meeting or exceeding, we did close that gap somewhat. And then you can see our scaled scores there in ELA and mathematics. As a parent in another district of a student in the class of 2027, I will say I'm a little bit biased in terms of thinking that this class, I think, was hit particularly hard by the pandemic. Just seeing where they were developmentally, where they were in their transitions in school. And I think you see that reflected here as well. So we did make gains in English language arts, but not at quite the same rate as we did in sixth and seventh grade. Mathematics, we went down in our percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations from one year to the next, versus the state that's starting to creep upwards. So while math in grade 8 across the state is not particularly strong, we are certainly not closing that gap in grade 8. In science, while we remain above the state's percentage of students meeting or exceeding, we did lose that percentage did go down, and certainly that that sort of gap between where we were in the state went down as well. So that is an area that we're looking to address that I will talk about shortly. And you can see then the scaled scores for the 3 areas.
Sorry.
This is just comparing the now a single cohort of students over time. So if you can see where the class of 27 performed as 8th graders, then as 7th graders, and then finally that same cohort as 6th graders. The 6th grade data does have an asterisk because that was the year that there was just a single session of testing in both ELA and math. So a really drastically different testing scenario, much shorter test, much less content there. And then the class of 2028, last year's 7th graders, you can see where they performed as 7th graders and then as 6th graders, just to have a little bit of a kind of apples to apples comparison of students. And then I just wanted to show you a little bit of the work we did at the last department meeting. So this is the process that our all of our teachers did under the leadership of our teacher leaders who facilitated an item analysis process. So as we talked about earlier this evening, there are so many different ways you can look at the data, and there's so much information to pull out that we really kind of have to do it in phases. So a couple of weeks ago, we had our department meetings, and our teacher leaders really focused on how our students fared on the curriculum itself, looking standard by standard, question by question, to see from a curriculum perspective what areas our students did well on and what areas were our growth areas for our kids. So this is just an example of a meeting agenda that shows the steps of the data analysis process. So this is a protocol that we've used in Danvers for many, many years. It's called the data-driven dialogue. I think maybe in workshops you've even used this under Mary's leadership. So you start by making predictions about the data, and then you visualize the data to really help you make sense of it. And I'm sure you all, as sitting here just seeing numbers, it's not quite the same as sort of getting into the data and working with it yourself to make sense of it. Then we identify observations, and finally inferences and questions. So this is the process that our teachers went through to look at the data. They actually go through question by question, and they first determine sort of what their benchmarks will be, what is considered a question, or a sort of a percentage of students getting the question right that meets our expectations, where are we below expectations, and what is sort of an urgent need of improvement. So our teachers go through the entire MCAS test, question by question, standard by standard, and actually like kind of physically highlight the questions so they really have a good visual of where we're performing standard by standard. So in that process, these were some of our findings. So in the English department, some of our strengths were that obviously we had overall improvement in grades 6 through 8. We exceeded our growth targets that were set by the state. In grades 6 and 7, our students responded well on their written responses. Our fiction reading was a strength in all grades, and nonfiction was a strength for our 8th graders. Some areas of growth we found were that our written responses in 8th grade in particular were not strong. Nonfiction reading is definitely a growth area for all of our students. Vocabulary development, and we also saw that in the iReady scores that I'll show you in a few moments. And while we had growth amongst our population as a whole, the performance of our students with disabilities declined. So our next steps in the English department is we are participating in something called a high quality instructional materials network through the Department of Education. So we have a team that is going through some professional learning through the department that will then help us to lead an internal curriculum review. We're definitely due, just as our elementary colleagues have been reviewing their literacy curriculum. we are going to be doing the same. So under the guidance, this process laid out through the state. And then also we're using iReady data to target specific skills for development in specific cohorts of students. So the iReady actually allows us to group students by strengths and challenge areas so that we can provide really targeted instruction. In mathematics, our overall average scaled score did show improvement. Some specific curricular areas that were strengths in grade 6 were the distributive property and statistics and probability. Grade 7 was number sense and geometry, and in grade 8, transformation. So that's really like the level of detail that our students or our teachers rather undergo in data analysis. In all 3 grades, there were topics that were tested that we just hadn't gotten to yet in the curriculum. You know, it's sort of inevitable when you test in April and our school year goes until mid-June. Our constructed response and short answer questions are definitely areas of growth for us. And then, as we talked about in the subcommittee meeting earlier, our high needs students, our low income students, EL and former EL students, students with disabilities, and Hispanic students all declined. So clearly we have a ton of work to do with our special populations. And then the most significant gap of all those special populations is the gap between our students with disabilities and their non-disabled peers. So what are we doing about it? We have a lot that we need to do. Our Carnegie Learning staff developer is actually here in Massachusetts right now. She is working with our staff. She was in the building today and is working with our teachers again tomorrow, and then moving on to the high school at the end of the week. She was with us in June and again in August to help us not only refine our curriculum, our scope and sequence, but also she's worked with us to analyze our testing data. She is working also with teachers. This week, she's working specifically on classroom instruction in implementing their Carnegie curriculum. Similar to English, we're using the iReady data to target specific skills for development for specific populations. We are working to incorporate more constructed response and short answer questions, the types of questions that students are asked on the MCAS. Those really aren't what necessarily the Carnegie curriculum assessment questions look like. So we are infusing more of those into our classroom assessments. We have more data analysis to do, especially at the student level. And one piece we want to look at is the math intervention and just see correlations or lack thereof, perhaps, between students who were targeted for our Tier 2 math intervention last year and see if we can see data and how those students fared on the MCAS. We're going to use this data along with iReady to identify students for math intervention in trimester 2. We want to have some sort of MCAS prep classes in late winter or early spring, just to really provide that would be outside the school day and just provide more access and more repetition, more practice for those kids who are really at the cusp, who are just so close to being in that meets expectations category. And then finally, we're spending a lot of time looking at our current schedule and our structures for instructional time and student supports to see if there are just better ways to be structuring our day to provide more support to kids. And finally, our science item analysis bore out that there were strengths in cellular respiration and heat transfer and genetics were all areas of strength. We maintained our percentage of students meeting or exceeding being higher than the state percentage. But in areas of growth, we found that earth and space science and in engineering were both areas where students did not perform as well as we would expect. Our constructed response questions, again, are areas of growth for us. Our gap between students with disabilities and their non-disabled students. And when we looked at the accountability data, so this isn't readily apparent when you look at just the scores themselves, but then when you get into that accountability formula, we did not meet any of the growth targets in science. So while we're performing well, we weren't performing as well as we should have if we had stayed on the same trajectory of growth that we had been on in previous years. So we're currently reviewing the precision the alignment of our current curriculum with the standards, and looking specifically at how MCAS assesses the standards versus how we've been assessing them, and seeing any disconnect that might be there, and some work that we need to do. We're looking at our current curriculum using a rubric that the state uses to evaluate curricula, called Curate. We're looking at we're not necessarily up for a curriculum review, but we're at least looking at our current curriculum to identify strength and challenge areas. And then engineering standards are only currently taught during STEM classes, which are an exploratory class. And so due to scheduling constraints, not all students are able to take STEM, or may only take it once in their 3 years. So we want to look at how many students that impacts. And again, perhaps that's another point in the schedule that needs to be corrected. So we also wanted to show you the fall iReady data. We've spoken about this in the past. We use the spring iReady data as the basis for our school improvement plan goal. So we wanted to just make this available as well, because it's another data point that we're using, obviously, in our decision making and in our structures. One thing that I think we are really finding is that all students really kind of understand MCAS, and they understand the importance of it. Families understand the importance of it, whereas iReady, in that it's so new, and perhaps we did not do enough to communicate to students and families what the role of iReady was. We don't, obviously this data is important, and it's something we're looking at, but we don't know necessarily if this reflects what students know and are able to do. But it's what we have, so we're using it as just another point of reference. So you can see it breaks down to different domains, different specific reading skills. Teachers are using this to create some of their own improvement goals. So we have some of our English and social studies teachers are collaborating to write goals specifically around vocabulary development and around informational text reading, reading comprehension. So you'll see that band of students who are identified here as being several grade levels below. The MCAS data doesn't necessarily bear out quite this level of gap, but it's, again, another piece of information that we're using. And again, the iReady data allows us to group kids and look at, okay, who specifically has vocabulary weaknesses? What can we do to support them? Who specifically has certain comprehension gaps? And then what types of instruction do they need to close those gaps? So that's some of the work that we're doing. Actually, Wednesday at our early release day, we'll have training from iReady on how to use this data for differentiated small group instruction. And then you can see the math data here, again, is broken up in domains, fairly similar to the domains that are reported on the MCAS in terms of number sense, operations, algebraic thinking, and then the measurement and data, which is sort of like the statistics, and then geometry units. So it reports out by who's on grade level, who's behind and mid. And then we're using this data similarly to provide some small group differentiated instruction. So what else are we doing? We've completed our PLC level item analysis of the data. We are working with our PLC facilitators to create assessment calendars based on priority standards. So what teachers are going to do is identify their most important standards that they absolutely need to know that every student has achieved proficiency around. We're asking them to identify when are they giving that assessment, when do they intend to analyze that data in their PLC meeting, and Adam and I will be working with teams around their PLC meetings to support them in their data analysis to make sure they're really using that data to inform instruction and supporting them in that skill. As I said, we're getting training from iReady this Wednesday on creating small group instructional priorities and planning differentiated instruction. As a school, we're really placing a lot of emphasis on attendance, student engagement, and academic rigor. Just in our efforts to be especially visible in the hallways as administrators, we are collecting some some qualitative data and quantitative data on how many students are in the hallways. And we're just really placing emphasis on kids being engaged and in the classroom so that they can be learning. If they're out in the hall, they're not going to be making progress academically. And our guidance counselors and assistant principals all have set student learning goals targeting attendance rates. So they're really focusing in their practice this year on supporting families, on just helping kids get to school. We have a visioning study group that's looking at our current schedule and supports for students' diverse needs, including our special education model. And then finally, we have new and updated MCAS assessments that we are going to be working with the department to prepare for. So in civics, this spring, there's going to be a field test. And that basically means the state is collecting data to see how students perform across the state on this field test. It was piloted the last, I think, 2 or 3 springs, but this year it's a statewide field test. And then next year it will be operational. So next year's 8th graders will have a 4th MCAS test to add to their repertoire. So we are working on preparing for that. And they are also revising the science test to make it more of a performance assessment. That's being field tested in the spring of 2025 and will be operational in spring of 2026. So we have, so I am working, I am attending opportunities and trainings through the state. Our teacher leaders are getting prepared to support their colleagues in preparing for these assessments.
Okay, thank you, Ellen.
Sure.
So just like looking, just some things just to clarify. So based on the scale score for all grade levels and for each subject, we're at partially meeting, right?
If you were to look across grade levels and subjects, yes, I think, yes, we'd fall in partially meeting.
Okay. So I know that obviously MCAS is one data point, and in some ways you could say, okay, like it's kind of dead because it's so long ago, but we recently have iReady scores, and looking at the iReady scores, which are like the organization stands behind as a predictor of standardized test performance. And I understand it's the beginning of the year, but we're still have more kids partially meeting and not meeting grade level expectations as far as math and reading. So I guess just looking at this, like if we're looking at report cards, are kids getting C's and like D's and F's? Because I'm just wondering, if we're putting out a lot of A's and B's, shouldn't these benchmark assessments also reflect that? Or do we not have enough rigor in the academic classes on a regular basis?
I think some of what, and I've had discussions just recently with some other math teachers around this, I think philosophically, most of our teachers grade towards, do they meet the expectation, or do they demonstrate mastery of the standards? Do they get there eventually? And I think grades reflect not how long it took to get necessarily to mastery, but the fact that they did get to mastery. So, maybe they didn't get they didn't get it the first time, but they were able to, work with the teacher to revise, to retake. And so if they got to mastery eventually, that's often what the grade is reflecting. Whereas these high stakes assessments, or even these benchmarks, like the iReady, don't, obviously it's, if you don't get it the first time, you don't get it. And so there absolutely is a disconnect, I think, between our grading practices and what these standardized tests demonstrate.
Just because, looking just at this, and we talked about this in the subcommittee, like this, and again, I know it's not all data points, but like this is really concerning to me. And I know you talked about that for many years. We've used the data-driven dialogue as a method to analyze data. Well, if that's what we've been using and we haven't seen huge improvements in the various data points, like, is it time to look at a different model to analyze data? Like, how effective is that working?
I don't think it's so much that the data-driven diet, I think as a protocol for looking at data, that works. It's really what you do with the data. I think that's where we've fallen down. And that was what when we were in need of improvement prior to the pandemic, that was really what we did put our stock in, that FAR cycle that Mary presented on in the subcommittee meeting, and we did make gains. So it's not that we're not looking at data properly, it's perhaps we're not acting on the data really in a really timely manner, or not using sort of that day-to-day classroom assessment data as effectively as we can. That's something that we're working with our PLC facilitators, is really moving away from using PLC time to just plan instruction, plan the what are we teaching, but rather use that PLC time to really look at data on a granular level. So we're making specific instructional moves for the kids in front of us, and what they've mastered and what they haven't.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the school committee?
Yeah, I think
Gabe has his hand up.
Yeah, hi. Question for Ellen. Do you think we're looking at too much data? Because I will say the iReady data is a little bit alarming, but from just what I could gather on my own, it's not really a transparent scoring model. Like, you're getting these scores, you're getting assessments, but you're really not seeing what the questions and answers are. Yeah. And then we have our MCAS. So is it a little bit of like analysis paralysis, if it's okay to say that? Yeah. Because I'll say the iReady data, if you go back a couple of slides, was pretty alarming. It looks like more students were underperforming, 2 and 3 grades below. Like, that's the largest chunk of students. So how do you equate that with small group learning, where you have a majority of students who are underperforming? So this is a bit concerning, especially with the lack of transparency around what the analysis actually is. So it's a question of, are we looking at too much? We have MCAS and we have iReady, not the same model, not the same criteria. What are we really learning from these two different types of scoring methods?
What I like about adding the iReady to the mix is that as a classroom teacher, when I was an 8th grade English teacher, I would look at my data, and the data that I could get the most detailed information about were the kids who had left me and gone on to the high school. So yes, it kind of showed me, how I performed as a teacher, but it didn't really in order to get information about the kids in front of me, MCAS isn't really built that way. MCAS isn't really built to give you data about the kids that you have in front of you right now. It does, but it's not as clean. I can't easily run a report for an 8th grade English teacher on, these are the kids you have in front of you right now. Whereas iReady can give us that. So I think they each have their role.
Okay, so we should be looking at them in completely different ways, because I kind of see it as almost like an MCAS correlation, and then you're looking for grades, and there's really no straight path there. We're looking at completely different sets of data for completely different purposes.
Yes.
That was unclear to me. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, that's
but Gabe, from a reading standpoint, the iReady data, benchmark assessments are supposed to predict how the kids will perform at the end of the year on MCAS, as far as reading, not writing, because iReady doesn't assess writing.
Right, correct.
Tough stuff.
Is iReady data available to caregivers?
Yeah, conferences, at conference time.
Yeah, at conferences, the teachers are, they can have the reports available to share the data with families.
Do we ask for that in advance, or will they have it?
They'll have it.
I'm throwing this comment out there, especially at the middle school level. Our conferences are, 5 minutes long per teacher? Yeah. I'm just putting that out to the whole school committee. So when parents are going in to talk to their math teacher, they have 5 minutes.
I just had a quick. So first of all, I think the ELA scores are encouraging, right? That we're trending above, and I saw the growth, and I think that was good. What was alarming to me was the middle. I think the 7th grade, where 7 out of 10 of the kids, actually more than 7 out of 10 of the kids, are below, or I forget it's partially meeting or
Partially
not,
meeting and
or not meeting, right? So, you know, and we asked this question 2 weeks ago to Julie when she came and presented, and I'd just like to know what can we, if we were to try to get some quick wins on this and see how we can do it, because you know, well, let me ask the question, then I'll give it a quick further up. But if we're going to try to get some quick wins on this, you know, what kind of resources can we throw at it? And I saw you had a comprehensive plan about, you know, working with the coach and doing things. And I think there's some good stuff in there. But as far as when we're looking at it, if we could throw money at it, you know, what would that look like? But you know, my concern is that these terrible scores are going, and they are terrible, right? They're not great. And I know we continue to hide behind it, and we say, you know, COVID affected it. I totally get it, but I have a feeling we're going to continue to keep saying these are COVID kids, right? And it's going to be 11th grade, and it's with these scores are not going to, you know, we're not going to stop the bleeding. So I just want to see how can we stop the bleeding on these scores, get these scores higher, because I look at the bigger picture, and I know these are just data points. You know, it's one data point, but you know, I'm looking at are the kids achieving to where they need to be, and that's how parents in the community look at it, whether you know whether it's fair or not. So you know, so I'll go back to my original questions, but what can we throw at it from a resource standpoint? I think specifically for math, what can we throw at it?
I don't, you know, sadly, I don't know that there are you know, if there were quick wins in education, nobody would be in this boat, I think. Unfortunately, I think, you know, using every minute of instruction that we have, whether it be, you know, Rise Block, class time, it's, you know, every minute from the beginning of the period to the end for 53 minutes every day is of paramount importance. You know, looking at those classes where we do have two educators in the room, how are we leveraging those two educators in those co-taught classes so that we are getting as much quality instruction to every kid, every child, as much as we can. Looking at, again, if the iReady data tells us that there are these kids that are missing these prerequisite skills, because that's actually the name of the report that we get from iReady for mathematics, is it's a prerequisite skills report. So it tells you if you're, you know, if you're working on statistics and probability in grade 7, based on how your students tested, these students are missing these prerequisite skills. So what can we do using Rise Block, using perhaps other, you know, Robin had spoke earlier this evening about, you know, maybe we put some other types of interventions in place before the end of the school year, you know, not for next year, but for now. What types of extra access to mathematics instruction could we provide for kids? So I don't know that that's a quick win from like a scheduling, structural, contractual standpoint, but you know, that's certainly where my head goes right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's valid. I think it's to address things sooner rather than let's worry about the MCAS the next year. I think if we could try to address things quicker now that we have this data, and I know that kids are a year further, like to your point, like if you're in 8th grade and these things have moved on, the kids are in 9th grade at that point. So that's a you know, a high school problem at that point. But as far as like, I think to have a timely response is on the right track.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Ellen, you made a comment that you created your goals before receiving the data. Now that you have the data, would you change the assessment goal from 10%?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd like to see that number be higher for sure. I thought you were going to ask, would you focus on math? And I think that's what I thought. And that's, you know, a teacher said, why are we focusing on reading when, you know, math is now, you know, playing out as our weaker area. Our ELA curriculum is so text heavy that you know, we do believe really strongly that reading is still a barrier to access to math, to science, certainly, you know, to social studies. So, you know, that's why I feel like focusing on the reading for an achievement goal is definitely like where we're still going to find a lot of bang for our buck. As far as a leverage point. But yeah, 10, you know, when you look at the numbers, 10%, 24 kids, that's not enough. That's just not enough. So thanks for asking the question.
I have a, a couple of questions if you're all set, Alice.
Mhm.
So talk to us about what a constructed response question is. They asked because both the science and the math, that was identified as an opportunity.
It's, old school. We would have called it like not in an essay necessarily, but basically an application. It's a written response. In the old MCAS, it was the open response questions, but any
Okay.
sort of kind of written application of the information, as opposed to like, putting in a number basically, or a short answer.
So there's a connection, it would seem, between the facility with the language and reading and comprehension, working with informational texts, that sort of, it seems like it's all sort of tied together. So when you see I think the informational text response or reading, that was an opportunity, and the constructed response questions are opportunities. So it feels like, okay, there's a spot going on there in terms of reading comprehension.
And, going back to Josh's question about quick wins, there are certainly some test taking strategies that our English teachers clearly had a lot of success with in the spring. One specific strategy that the entire English department implemented last year was, not to get too much in the weeds, but it was essentially a do what, and they really analyzing the question to say, it was a really concrete strategy for helping kids analyze what they were being asked in the question. So much of the barrier sometimes is just figuring out what are all the components that a successful question includes. And I think taking that strategy that was so successful in English and applying it in math and in science would be a really good. I mean, I believe in my heart that in the MCAS, the kids are not fully showing what they know. I know that our kids know more and can do more than this data reflects. And I think just little things like helping them break down the question better so that they can then really present all of their knowledge and all of their understanding more effectively and coherently is going to bear fruit for us.
Yeah, we don't want to drill, killing by drilling, but you do, some basic test taking skills pointed at ways you think you can help them sounds good. I think you sort of made it clear the achievement gap between some of our cohorts and other students. It's a real issue. Are we seeing that? Is that sort of a general problem in education at this point? Because I know that that's one of the things you hear about Boston and other districts. It's the same thing, that for all of the work and for all of the testing and for all of the money, closing the achievement gaps still seems to be something that no one has figured out really. I mean, is that a fair statement?
It is. It certainly is. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do have, they give us just like Mary showed us the trend data for our entire population, you can look at those disaggregated trend data. And certainly that gap is, yes, that is pervasive across the state, but we care about our kids. So.
Last question I have really is the attendance issue. Obviously, what I'm hearing is it goes beyond students who aren't coming to school because they're sick, because I mean that should be sort of a predictable flat number, more or less. So what is driving is it the anxiety issues? Is it lack of connection? What do we think is driving our attendance issue?
I think it's all of the above. I think anxiety, not feeling connected. I mean, we have families who, if this child misses the bus, they don't have a ride to school. There's maybe not a vehicle to get kids to school. So, I mean, I think there's a whole host of issues at play there. And we could, certainly, I think some of our work would be to dig in to why that is exactly. But just the fact that, again, that data is not consistent, that there's a gap amongst different populations of students in terms of their attendance. Again, I think that gives us a lot to, as a school, take a hard look at what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, families, look, if you've got both parents working and both parents have to be at a certain place, and when that student misses the bus, that can throw the whole family into an uproar as to how you're going to resolve it. There's a responsibility on the family, obviously, but anything that we can do to support those students and help them get to school is an important piece, right? I understand it's not just an educational challenge. It sounds like it's a societal challenge as well. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. If there's no other questions, we can go to the high school. I know Peter is usually very concise.
Robin, I'm sorry, can I just add a few things?
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to add, I think Ellen did a great job presenting all that information. It's been a lot, coming in new, me realizing it's been a lot for one person to kind of shoulder all of this the last few years at the middle schools. I'm really excited to partner with Ellen on all the things that she's projected as our action steps. I think coming in this year, our first priority was just kind of getting the school in a good place, just kind of getting things orderly. Our goal was kind of first trimester, get the school into good routines. And now we're really pushing our administrative team to be in classrooms to kind of see like what is going on at the ground level, to try to kind of figure out where the gap is, because, I see on the surface level, kids working really hard, teachers working really hard, but it's not translating obviously into the outcomes we want. Thus another reason we put this study group together, to kind of see if we have the right ingredients, but maybe not the right recipe as far as what we're doing. So I think we'll have a lot more to kind of report out on, as we get into the second trimester, as we're in classrooms more, kind of working closer with teachers around instruction. So I just wanted to add, I've been here listening. Ellen did a great job. And, coming in new this year, I've just been doing a lot of observing and trying to understand the data as well.
Thank you, Adam. And I think it's great. Like the more everyone is in the classrooms, the more that you can see, because you're seeing it firsthand. So I think that's really important. So thank you both. Okay, Peter, you're up.
I gotta share my screen.
So I think I'm going to have Mary kick it off like she did for middle school as well. Then I'll jump in.
Yep. Sorry. I got to get into the sharing mode. Great. So here's Danvers High's MCAS data. And again, I know that give you some context for what their testing was. I know COVID is, we've been relying on that, but it is a factor in play, especially here at the grade 10. The grade 10 students took a 2-section ELA and math test this past year, but the last time they had a 2-section math or ELA test was in 6th grade. So there has been some inconsistency in their MCAS practices. So we just wanted to highlight that. Trending with the state and the math, we'll start with the math, is they were at the state average last year, but then trending downward below the state average this past year. Peter will give you more context for that. In ELA, we were above the state, and now we're like just at the state average with that, which is kind of like our historical. If you look back to 1921, we're right there teetering with the state. So in ELA. And then in science, we've been above the state average, with the gap closing a little bit in this past year. So that's just the quick shot overview, and I'm turning it over to Peter.
Thanks, Mary. So similar to Ellen, I'll ground, before we jump into the MCAS data specifically, I'll ground our work in our school improvement plan goals that were reviewed earlier this year. So for our first goal is around safe and supporting learning environments. So this is really all of our work around sense of belonging, making sure students feel connected to our school. Our indicators in these areas involve looking at some of the data from the vocal survey that they take at the end of the MCAS exam, as well as our attendance data and chronic absenteeism rates. For goal number 2, it's really around our multi-tiered systems of support structures that we're putting in, both at the 9th and 10th grade level, and how is that impacting student success across the board in different subject areas. And then our third goal, since some of our accountability data is around post-secondary plans, graduation rate. It's ensuring that all students have the opportunity to be thinking about their post-secondary options and becoming civically engaged members of the community. So this involves different programming such as our innovation career pathways, our early college program, and making sure that we're offering advanced coursework to students, and also ensuring that all of our subgroups are represented in that advanced coursework, that we're allowing for access for all students to be able to get there. And then also in line with the new requirement from the state that all students need to complete a civics project. We're currently working with our staff to figure out where that's going to fall to ensure that that requirement is met in the high school. All right, so let me start by going over a comparison of achievement data from last year and this year. So first with ELA, last year we saw we were slightly above the state at 58%, and we saw a slight dip in student achievement from last year to this year. So right now we went from slightly above the state to being at the state. We saw the most dramatic change in our math, similar to other levels, going from 49% last year, which was almost right at the state, to 40% this year compared to 50%, which was at the state level. And then consistently from last year to this year, we pretty much stayed the same, 53% and 52%, about the same amount above the state level. And then looking at the average scaled scores, we can see that we see a similar story, with English being exactly the same, math being below, and then biology being slightly above. So to go along with the context that Mary said at the beginning, I thought it was interesting to look at the cohort data, looking at this grade 10 cohort compared to their achievement in 8th grade compared to 10th grade. So if we look at their achievement data in 8th grade, 34% of them were meeting or exceeding expectations in ELA, compared to when they took the ELA MCAS exam in 10th grade, 58% of them were meeting or exceeding. And then the same thing looking at math, they were 22% in 8th grade and then 40% in 10th grade. And so looking at the SGP, or the student growth percentile, for ELA, that's 48.3, and for math, it's 45.6. And basically what this represents, for those unfamiliar, is it shows moderate growth from 8th grade to 10th grade. Typically, if it's between 40 to 60, that's the area you want to aim for. So next steps. So I'll go over next steps that we were able to carry out initially, and then some of this will come later in the year, and then I'll do a deeper dive into each of the 3 areas that we test on. So Adam and I were able to do a deep dive data analysis with teacher leaders and PLC facilitators a couple weeks ago at our after school meeting. So we were able to look at the item analysis for all of the MCAS exams and have a group discussion around different things we noted, similar to the data-driven dialogue protocol that Ellen facilitated with her teams. At this point, all of our PLC facilitators are working within their teams to identify priority standards based on what we looked at in order to implement, review, revise common formative assessments and common midterm items that can assess those priority standards. So really our focus this year with our teacher leaders and with our PLC facilitators is really emphasizing that part of the FAR cycle that Mary talked about, where they're using common planning time not just to plan, but to continuously look at the local data they're getting in their classrooms to take some sort of action after the fact before we get to these high stakes assessments. So we're trying to do this as initial steps now and make this a common practice before we get to the exams at the end of the year. So our next touch point as a full group will be in January. Our hope is that Adam and I can continue to visit PLCs to get a status check on their data analysis, data collection, and then that instruction can be impacted between now and March for ELA, May for math, and June for the biology and MCAS exams. So I'll start with ELA. I'll start with some, for all of the subjects, I'll start with some item analysis takeaways, go into some of the takeaways that the larger group gleaned, and then go into some additional information in terms of our next steps. So for ELA item analysis, the good thing that we noticed was that we're above the state in mostly a majority of the items. Some of the specific topics that we were stronger with were character analysis, purpose of punctuation, analyzing tone, identifying claims and details. Some of the weaker topics were figurative language and poetry, comparing language use in two articles, and analyzing point of view in a poem. So right there, when we were discussing with the larger group, we noted that poetry was a weakness, something to focus on, as well as comparing two texts at the same time. The other thing that was interesting was all essay questions are at or slightly below the state performance. So definitely for some of the writing standards, that is a focus area that we pointed out for moving forward.
Oops, sorry, my mouse wasn't working.
No worries. So these are some of the other takeaways that the larger group had. So we had a great discussion around some of the standards on the ELA item analysis that are also covered extensively in social studies. So reflecting on data from the social studies courses, some of our social studies colleagues noted that there's a commonality in skills that students are struggling with across the board, both in ELA and social studies. So I think moving forward, it'll be important not just to think about it in terms of an actions item for the ELA department, but what are we doing in our other departments as well that also cover these same skills and standards to also support our students in doing well at these standards being addressed. The other thing that we noticed in these different areas is the difference between male and female students, and it was different based on the tested items. So for ELA, there was a fairly significant gender gap between male and female students. Females are achieving at a higher rate than males. Students appeared to struggle with standards related to poetry, which I noted, and essay scores are below the state performance on each item, which I noted. All right, so that's a summary for ELA. For math, for the both selected response and constructed responses, we were below the state in most items, as is represented by the achievement data that we reviewed at the beginning. Some of our stronger topics are determining the coordinates of a vertex of a pentagon, identifying graphs of triangles on coordinate planes after transformations, relating to side lengths and angle measures in congruent triangles. And some of our weaker topics are factoring a quadratic expression, identifying equivalent polynomial expressions, determining median value of real world data, and comparing linear and exponential functions. Sounds like complex stuff, right? So what I thought was interesting, which we talked with the larger group, a lot of the things that students tended to do better on were a lot of the geometry topics, which they're more likely to have seen more recently. And a lot of the things that they struggled with were some of the algebra topics or advanced algebra topics, which they would either have had the previous year, so it's not as fresh in their mind. And although there is algebra infused in geometry, it's not as front of mind being used all the time. Or some of these advanced algebra skills, they perhaps may not have gotten to yet if it's in a sequence of math courses that would be next in line for them to take. And the last bullet I have is, although still below the state, students perform better overall on constructed response items compared to most of the selected response items. So we thought that was encouraging, that when students were given the opportunity to demonstrate what they know in a constructed response item, they seem to be performing better than that. Of course, it's still discouraging that for the multiple choice or selected response items, they weren't performing as well. But that was an interesting takeaway that we noticed. So these were some of the other takeaways that our larger PLC facilitator group noted. So digging deeper into our subgroups, there's a achievement and achievement of white students, so that's 18% versus 44%.
Peter, maybe if you turn off your camera, you can you're breaking up a little bit. So if you turn off your camera,
male versus female, even.
Oh, there, good.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Sorry about that. As was noticeable earlier, the school state differential was more glaring in math. And as Mary went over the student assessment history and impact of the pandemic that had on learning over time. And at the end of some of these conversations, we were able to brainstorm some potential ideas. So in thinking about scheduling and thinking about coursework, we thought about, if knowing that those Algebra 1 skills may be weaker for some students, how can we integrate opportunities for students to be, keeping those in front of mind? So whether that's running a semester-long Algebra 1 course or a quarter-long course, some way for students to get that additional algebra, math, and structure in their schedule sometime, if they need it. And then I know we've talked about math here earlier, so I just wanted to.
Can I ask a quick question before you slide on?
Yeah.
Because you put up a pretty big number there with Latino and Hispanic. I'm just wondering what that population is.
So yeah, if we dig down into the numbers, I actually have that in the one we presented for the subcommittee. 1 second. So that's 17 students. So the whole class, I think, is about 200. So that percentage is 17 students. So of course, any one of those students can sway that percentage drastically one way or the other.
Yeah, that's a horrible number based on the total population.
Yeah.
You're really not getting anything out of that. I would, putting up that number against that population, I just have to call it out for what it is. It's a pretty gross misrepresentation given the population. I would never present this number.
Hey, the subgroups, they only allow, they report out on any subgroup that is of 10 kids or more. And like you said, Gabe, like 10, 12 kids, 14.
Yeah, that's a ridiculous
One kid sways
number.
the whole group.
Exactly. And it's incredibly misleading to the community. So I just have to call that out. You should never put that up there.
I mean, I think I wanted to honor the work that our teacher leaders and PLC facilitators did by putting these.
Yeah, but it's almost like saying the Hispanic and Latino population are bringing down the scores for the entire, population.
That's not. No, it's not.
I don't think that's what it's saying. I have to disagree.
What do you think it's saying?
I think it's saying that we have an obligation to look at all the different populations of our kids and ensure that they're getting the access to instruction that they need, and that they're connected, and that there are people in the building that they feel like they can go to, and that they can get the instructions that they need. So I don't think our scores are where they are. Any particular group leads to where we are. I just think the point was this came from one teacher actually who really looked at the data and thought about the kids in front of him and was reflecting on, is there something I can do to better connect with these?
Yeah, but the sample size isn't there, and that's basic math. That's like saying if you had a class of 5 women and 45 men, and 2 of the women failed, almost 50% of them didn't perform, and that number would be misleading. That's my point.
Okay, well, and I would just say that if we don't recognize who the kids are in front of us, whether it's 17 kids or 50 kids, then I think we're also not valuing part of their story in the school. And I think that's been
Adam, I have to disagree with you. So
Okay,
I made
well,
my
we
statement,
can-
and that's it. I'm not looking for an argument. I think the number speaks for itself.
Well, thank you for your feedback.
I will say that when we were in the room looking at this together, I found the conversation to be very supportive and wanting to dig down and look at which students were in each indicator to get down to the student level to figure out what we can specifically do for each individual student to make sure that they're showing progress. So I know that at face value, it may be horrifying to look at, but I feel like our response to it is what matters moving forward. So this is, as I referenced, digging into some local data that we can use to look at moving forward. As we left our meeting last time, all teachers were expected to identify some sort of common assessments that they can look at. So with our Carnegie Learning Program integrated in every unit, students are expected to work on Mathia, either within the unit or outside of the school. And this is just another way that teachers can get a gauge of how students are performing on the standards of the lesson. So I pulled a screenshot here from one of the teachers' classes. This was from just earlier last week. And teachers can take a look at what workspaces students have completed, and then how they're performing on the standards within each unit to know if intervention or remediation is necessary. So for example, those 2 students right there, they could identify what skills students were working on and then immediately intervene in the moment so they can make progress moving forward. And this is sort of a summary of some of the goals that not only that we're working at the high school, but that the middle school has as well. Elle and I are pretty much in line with these. So in terms of the on-site coaching that we're doing with Carnegie Learning for our focus areas, really the initial training and the curriculum implementation. For our Algebra 2 team, this is year 3 for them. This is only our 2nd year for Algebra 1. So making sure we're implementing the curriculum with fidelity. And then, of course, as we continue to add geometry for the upcoming year, making sure that any new teachers onboarding feel comfortable with the implementation. Then also at the classroom level, the coaches are able to provide lesson level observations and coaching around different student engagement strategies utilizing the curriculum. And then also at the end of last year and the start of this year, the teachers were able to work with the coach to do a review and refinement of the scope and sequence. As when any new adoption happens, there can be an initial challenge around pacing. I know some of our Algebra 1 teachers, that was a challenge for last year. So continuing to look at that, going through it once definitely provides some initial experience in that, and then adjusting things as fit to adjust moving forward. All right, and then lastly, we have biology. So some takeaways from the biology item analysis. We were above the state in most items. Some of the stronger topics were heredity and ecology. Some of our weaker topics were biological molecules and evolution. Another interesting takeaway was that all the constructed response items were either at or above the state. The majority were above. I think only one was just at the state. And this, I think, is due to some of the work that our biology team has really put work into over the past couple of years. It's been both their student learning goal and professional practice goal to really look at constructed response items, go over CER strategies, and really have students practice how to construct a response when they are met with these types of questions. So I think we're seeing the direct results of that work. I think moving forward, looking at some of the selected response questions, I think it'll be good for us to focus on some reading comprehension strategies, because I think that's where our students struggle in terms of analyzing larger chunks of text and then moving on to what the question is asking of them.
Sorry.
No worries. All right, so here are the takeaways from our meeting with all the teacher leaders. So we didn't perform lower than the state on any open response questions. There was a difference in performance between topics from semester 1 and semester 2. So obviously those that were covered less recently may have been weaker. Feedback from the biology team was there was some unclarity between what the state was including in the assessment items based on language of the standards. So they're reviewing that in terms of their lessons and units. In terms of male and female students, there was a disparity that we noticed. So males, 46% were meeting and exceeding expectations, females, 59%. So figuring out what's going on there. We were above the state average for meeting expectations. And for Hispanic Latino students, 17% not meeting expectations, which was higher than ELA and math. And as I said earlier, we started to drill down further to identify specific students to support moving forward. And the last thing I wanted to say about our science courses is, as part of the advanced science coursework that we do offer, our Project Lead the Way courses, and the approach that they do take really helps students build their skills to then go on and create complex projects or apply it to real world problems. So the approach used in these types of courses are it's called the APP approach. So they start with activities to start to build those focus areas and skills. You move on to a project to apply those skills, and then can apply it to a problem. And there are actually opportunities within these courses for students to create projects that could potentially solve real world problems that they can then submit to industry professionals for feedback, which I think is just another amazing opportunity for students to get that experience both in networking with individuals in areas they may be interested in going in for their college and career, but also these skills that can apply to any of their content areas that they also might be interested in pursuing. And I think I have one more slide about this. So I was able to attend a recent conference for the Project Lead the Way courses, and I really appreciate some of the resources they're providing to our teachers in these science courses. So they go through the specific activities that teachers should be addressing, and they name the focus skills that students should be meeting at the end of those lessons. And something that was interesting that I hadn't seen before is they have not now skills. Sometimes it can feel overwhelming looking at a standard and noting all the things that students should be able to do by the end of a course. So they go through each of the lessons and identify what should the students be able to do by the end of this lesson, and don't necessarily worry about these more advanced skills because they'll take care of those later. So I think this could just really help teachers to hone in on what the focus is without being too all over the place, for lack of a better phrase. And I think I just have one more. I just wanted to, first, so a summary of everything. So ELA and so highlights from everything that I just presented. ELA and bioachievement was at or above the state. We had substantial cohort growth between grade 8 and grade 10 in math and ELA. Math achievement for students with disabilities increased from 22 to 23, so that was a bright spot within that subgroup data. Something else positive that wasn't directly related to our MCAS data, but I wanted to point out because I think it was significant, was our chronic absenteeism rate substantially decreased in all subgroups from 22 to 23. So it was 33%, and now it's 26.1%. So actually, we got full credit for that indicator in our accountability report. And then lastly, high school biology item analysis has increased in items at or above the state. And then areas of growth. We had a decrease in overall achievement in ELA, math, and bio compared to last year. We had gaps in students meeting or exceeding in our subgroups. Our focus areas identified from ELA and math item analysis, we were lower than the state. And then continue to think about how we're implementing the new Carnegie Learning and Algebra 1 at the high school, which is the new subject area that we're doing.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Yep, that's the presentation. So what questions? Gabe, do you want to, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember what you call it, but I'm looking for correlation between engagement and scores. I'm wondering if we look at both of those. I believe in the high school there's some kind of survey taken around.
Yeah,
like,
the vocal survey. That
Right.
data's not out yet from the state, but we're looking forward to presenting on that because the kids take a survey and talk about whether they're engaged in their academic coursework or not.
No, exactly, and you guys can probably speak better to it or not, but I know that, obviously Essex Tech is a selective school, but I'm really curious about, what those outcomes would look like if students were more engaged, meaning, we know that kids who probably should be in the technical school because they would prefer to do something more hands-on, thus they're more engaged, thus their scores go up. I wonder if there's a correlation between, having a larger group of kids who maybe don't get into the tech, engagements down. And maybe that's a deeper study, but it's just something overall that I've been thinking about when, most technical schools will take those kids who academically don't have that rigor, but if there's engagement in what they want to do, the scores will go up. And those academics on the call probably know this deeper and better than me, but it's just something I'm aware of.
Yep.
Peter, I'm happy with the growth for that cohort of kids, because it's 40 to 60% that the state average for SGP. And then I like that there's already a plan in place that's within the community block, but there is going to be that targeted intervention for the kids that need it. So I'm curious to see the growth with that, because I think obviously you'll see it just in their day-to-day classes too once they get that targeted piece.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, I think that was my big takeaways, because I know we talked a lot in the subcommittee. Anyone else have comments, questions?
Mary, is there one last slide after this?
Oh yeah, it was the MTSS one.
Oh yes, thank you. I'm sorry. I thought you were done, Peter. Did you stop talking? I'm sorry.
No worries. I thought there was a glitch or something. So this sort of speaks to what Robin said. A new addition to the schedule we have this year is a true MTSS structure to support grade 10 students, which obviously is this big testing year. And so we're going to coordinate with our SST process. They identify students that are at risk and need additional support, and then use some of the local data that I've referred to identify a small cohort of students to go through this MTS structure. So this will essentially be grade 10 win block. Grade 9 is focused on the executive functioning skills, and these students will have actual individualized goals to help them support them in their coursework. And so this would just be one example of a cycle. It would start on C day, and they would attend win block until they have reached their set goal. If they need to stay on through the next cycle, they can do that as well. But we also knew it was important for them to stay connected to the students in community block, because that's when it would happen. So they would still attend their community meeting as scheduled, the assembly as scheduled, but we are fortunate to have this additional time in the schedule to get this really targeted specific support for students that may need it.
So, just for like actual minutes and to understand what we're talking about, this is an extra couple hours per week that kids are getting targeted instruction around a specific subject area or specific skills. So we feel like it's a real win to go with the name. We think it's direct, it's targeted, it's kids have been identified for this, and we're hoping to see some gains from it.
Through the chair, Robin, you mind if I jump in? First of all, I've been doing this a really long time, and I have to say that this is one of the most comprehensive presentations that I've seen. And again, I know Mary and team has done a great job. Both Peter and Ellen put an enormous amount of time in. They're really aligning. They're working together, and the principals are working hard too. And to your point, Gabe, in terms of the engagement piece, that I think that this presentation really was to open up a lot of questions. We're trying to ask the hard questions, and we went into this like throwing a lot of things out in terms of everything from the subgroups to all that stuff, because we want to examine everything. And I applaud. It's not easy, as you know, to put yourself out to be vulnerable, but the data is the data. So my hat's off to the team. But that Project Lead the Way stuff that Peter was talking about is huge. That allows students a lot of different ways to find areas of engagement that a lot of high schools don't have. We didn't even have that where I was before. So I really applaud what they're doing in that area. The fact that this MTSS win block has been done, this is a process of evolution as I'm learning. So it is addressing some of those items where students that need some additional support for sure. And also, as I said, we'll talk more about the chronic absenteeism issue, because that ties into, I think it does deeper with sense of belonging and the other issues. We can blame COVID all we want, but we've moved beyond that. So they're asking the hard questions. They're coming out in front, and the dialogue was great tonight. But it was one of the most comprehensive presentations that I've seen. And again, for a reason, so we can get all this out, so we can keep trying to move forward. I think that's important. And being able to drill down not only from all students, but students that need any additional support. And that's the whole piece of not only the MTSS, but and we heard in our subcommittee other items too of interventions and more work that we need to do. So definitely, clearly, we have a lot more work to do, but the team's willing to do it. They've been working really hard at this. And again, I appreciate the dialogue and the interaction between, some good questions and points, because again, we're all trying to work to be the best that we can be. And it's not easy work, but I know they're rolling up their sleeves and they're getting it done, and they'll continue to do so.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Just one quick comment, Madam Chair. I was Peter, nice job on the presentation. One of the earlier slides, one of the first slides that you did was you showed the results from the 10th graders, but also showed what they were like in 8th grade. And this was just because we saw those previous scores for the HRMS presentation. I think it's encouraging to see that they were not great scores in 8th grade, and they really had a great improvement in the 10th grade. So it is encouraging. So I don't know if that's a bit of a hangover from the past culture that we might have had in the HRMS, which is clearly I think has shown great improvement even this year, even in the couple months that I've seen it and heard it anecdotally. But I was encouraged to see that. So I think if we can look at data points like that in the future, I think that would be a great addition to these presentations like that. So thank you.
Hey, can I ask one final question, because it was unclear? Can we go to slide 13? Because there were two different places where that statistic versus white and Latino students were put in. Slide 18, are you saying 18% of Latino students versus 44% of white students are achieving?
Meeting or exceeding.
All right, but then later, so 18% of Latino students are meeting and 44% of white students are meeting or exceeding.
Yes.
Okay, a couple slides lower, you showed those statistics again. And it said 17% not meeting expectations. Is that from
different content?
It is different. Okay.
That was bio, I believe.
Yeah, bio's grade
Okay.
9, ELA and math are grade 10.
Okay. And same thing, smaller sample size.
Yeah.
Just wanted
I
to be
would say,
clear.
Madam Chair, it feels like we've identified the issues, and I sense that what we're trying to do is impact what we can control in these students' lives, and trying to really get down to the nitty gritty with individual students, and make the difference that we can so that they improve their performance. I'm not sure what else can be done, in the sense that it looks like you're doing the right things to get where you want to get.
Right. I think that there's a really good plan, right now that for the kids to, address what the kids need right now.
Yep. And one more through the chair, if I could. I think, bringing out that point, Josh, in terms of that growth, that is a big piece. But again, the work that's been done here at the high school in terms of trying to create a positive culture, that should be noticed, because you have to have a base there. Obviously, if you're in a positive piece, it's your better chance for success overall. You can have the best programming in the world, but if you don't have the cultural piece, and I know Adam and his team have worked really hard to build that at the high school. I know Adam at the middle school is working really hard. So I appreciate the committee recognizing that piece, because that's important, but knowing that we got to keep going and push through, which is important. So that growth was really nice to see. And again, we went really deep into the subcommittee, just diving down, but we're trying to do that as a way to keep pushing forward. And I think that's important. Thank you again for the presentations and the dialogue.
Yeah, thank you to the curriculum directors and principals for your time and detailed presentation. You're welcome to stay. You can leave, or it's up to you. I know it's been a long night for all of you, so thank you.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you. So our order of business is the consent agenda, so we need a motion for that.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Janet, can you take a roll call, please?
Robin Doherty,
Yes.
Alice Campbell,
Yes.
Eric Crane,
Yes.
Josh Kepnes,
Yes.
Gabe Lopes.
Yes.
Okay. And then do we have any communication or NEC updates?
Yes, we had our board meeting last week, and a big topic of discussion really was reviewing the financial statements. The consortium, they're doing a good job. It was a positive report. Also, they're looking to improve their HVAC. They have a big project that they're working on, really need it. But at this point, it seems that they need more time to review. But we know that any delays that go into that increase the cost, and then came back with working on an evaluation of the executive director. So that was the meeting, and then we'll have a meeting next month, and I'm happy to update the committee.
Thank you. Eric, legislation?
Yes, I communicated with Representative Kearns, and she says there's a couple of things I would like to flag for the committee. This is the time of year when there are several legislative hearings on any given day. For example, today I was in hearings of the committees on financial services, mental health, and transportation. Last week at the Committee on Transportation, Danvers High School senior Reese Holland testified in favor of regulating electric skateboards. Reese's brother sustained serious injuries in a skateboarding accident this past August. She was articulate, and of course, her testimony came from the heart. Reese shared her research about laws in California requiring helmets for e-skateboarding. She got an A+ from me, and I'm sure Chris Hopkins would agree. So thank you, Reese, for doing that. There's also a PBD mother by the name of Maria Schlery who spoke in favor of legislation Sally has co-sponsored to crack down on people driving around stopped school buses with their stop arm out. PBD is doing a pilot to determine how often this occurs, and she says right now it is shocking how often it occurs. Last Wednesday, Danvers High School graduate Dan Gagnon, son of Danvers High School graduates Ann and Ron Gagnon, gave a talk at the State House about his book, A Salem Witch, the trial and execution and exoneration of Rebecca Nurse. They were proud to have Dan come to the State House, and his talk was very well attended. She said it's a wonderful reflection on the Danvers Public Schools. She also wanted to applaud the town of Danvers and the public schools for stepping up to welcome and care for migrant children. She is also meeting with Commissioner Riley, met with him last week, and he understands the demands being placed on the 81 plus communities that are accepting these students into our community. So, and she says, we all know we need federal support. So that would be the legislative update.
Thank you. Subcommittees, I know the and liaison updates, we obviously did the curriculum and equity one at the beginning. Policy, I think we touched upon all of that today.
Yeah.
Safety.
Sure. We had a safety committee meeting today. We reviewed our safety drills for October. The high school did theirs in September. The feedback was very well in terms of communication. And we went about this time trying to inform in advance that the drills were coming, and just really wanted to hone in on just having the drills go as well as they can go and do it right, not have that sense of, and the drills can certainly raise anxiety, but obviously any drill will, but just really the communication was important. Then the post communication was good too. I think, we're also looking to add another protocol in our communication. Right now we have lockdown, and then we have another term that is important is shelter in place. So that would be something, if it's happening in the building, keep people out of the hall, but we know shelter in place is more of like an outside threat. So we're looking at a way we can have another mechanism to inform that we need people out of the hall. It could be a medical issue, or maybe a student is dysregulated, or staff needs it. Something that is not of any imminent danger, but enough where we just need people out so we can mitigate the situation. So a stay put has been something we've discussed, and that's another element that can accomplish that and not raise the temperature by saying a shelter in place. So we're looking to bring that about. We're teasing through, any implications of that, but that was positive. And then a threat assessment protocol that would be uniform through the district. We're working on that, and there's a PD, professional development, in the end of November, but we have some exemplars that we've been reviewing. And also even looking at possibly applications on phones so staff can communicate in time of crisis. And then we receive more walkies for buildings. And then we're talking about the district-based, school-based walkies too. So covered a lot, which was great. And our next meeting is November 27th.
Thank you. We have Deep.
I can update that too. Deep held their meeting last week. And they're at a point now where the teacher grants have been advertised, and those are great opportunities for teachers to put an application in for areas to enhance their practice. And also they're looking for ways that Deep can fundraise to raise more money. They've had some traditional fundraisers, but they're looking for some new opportunities. The fall newsletter, I'll send that out tomorrow to the community. So it was a good meeting overall.
Great. Danvers Cares?
That will be next week.
Yes. CPAC.
Yep. Just a quick update. I met with CPAC this week, and we had a productive conversation. I think they're going to be in touch with you, Madam Chair, to present at one of the future meetings, but no specific updates right now.
Okay, thank you. Eric, I know you touched a little bit about Human Rights and Inclusion Committee. I don't know if you have any other updates.
Really, for this committee standpoint, the MLK event, which is in January, there was some discussion about whether that committee wants to perhaps change up the program, not necessarily changing what we do at the high school that afternoon, but perhaps adding different events throughout the day, actually. And there was some sense that maybe we don't have enough time to actually put something specific in place. It might be necessary to think, a year ahead on that. But there was some discussion. But I only mention it because I know that if they haven't done so already, this will be the time when the Inclusion Committee starts to communicate more with Dan and Mary and start working on the general planning for that event. We have a pretty good blueprint for it, but I would expect you'll see communication increasing just so that you guys know. And that's it.
Thank you. Our next meeting is in person on November 13th at 6:30 at Holton Richmond. So that's when we'll meet again. If we are all set, we need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Shanna, could you give us a roll call, please?
Gabe Lopes,
Yes.
Josh Kepnes,
Yes.
Eric Crane,
Yes.
Alice Campbell,
Yes.
Robin Doherty.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. I know it was a long, lengthy meeting with a lot of information. So thank you very much. Good night, Danvers. We'll see you on the 13th. Bye.